Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the horrific murder of 26-year-old Keiona Braxton. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. Alright, now that I'm done begging you to join my cult, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video was on a case that I had never heard of before, and I'm honestly surprised that I hadn't heard of it before, because it's the type of case that I would imagine the media like grabbing and running with big time. It has so many elements to it that are typically reported on when you see it in a case. It had a young woman being murdered in her home. It had a convoluted love triangle. It had a murder for hire plot and a controversial Alford plea. There are just so many elements to this case, but most importantly, there is a woman, a young woman who was in the prime of her life and literally had everything going for her, and she had her life stolen. So today I'm going to tell you that entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to, and at the end of the video I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your head as we go through the details, but the question of the day is this. Do you believe that the sentencing here was justice? Considering there is an Alford plea here, I'm very curious if you believe that there was enough evidence to get a conviction in this case, if they had actually gone through and tried to try this person. So let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. With all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the horrific murder of 26-year-old Keiona Braxton. Our story today begins on December 31st, 2008, New Year's Eve. It was just after 6:30 in the morning when a call came into 911 from an apartment complex called the Noel at Brook Hill on Crenshaw Road in Virginia. Now, residents woke in this building to the smell of smoke, so worrying that there might be a fire coming from an upstairs apartment, because that's where the origin of the smoke was, they called the police and they called the ambulances because they were worried that a fire was in the building and was going to spread and kill everybody. Obviously, you know how fires work. We all know how fires work. So police came. Firefighters came. They go to the apartments. They knock on the door, the apartment that the smoke's coming out. They knock on the door, and they get no response. So they break down that door. They've got to get in. There's a fire that needs to be put out. But when they went in that apartment, they could not have been prepared for the sight they were about to see. Once they entered that apartment, they saw that there was blood everywhere. It was on fire, yes, but it was also covered in blood. And as they moved through the apartment, they found the origin of the blood. And that was that there was a woman, a young woman, who had been viciously attacked, and she was at the back of the apartment near the patio door, and she was still alive, but she was struggling to live. So they tried to do all they could. They tried to perform life-saving measures, but unfortunately she was not able to be saved, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. Now, this woman had obvious physical signs of trauma that were not related to the fire. The fire had not done this to her. So it became clear right from the jump that whoever set this fire was doing so in an attempt to try to hide what they had done to this woman. And this woman was 26-year-old Keiona Braxton, 26-year-old pregnant Keiona Braxton. And she had been viciously murdered in her own home, the place where she was supposed to feel safe. Now, who was Keiona? Keiona Cecilia Braxton was born on July 3rd, 1982 to parents Joyce and Tommy, but it looks like she was raised by Joyce and Joyce's husband, William, so her stepfather. Keiona was the baby of the family. She had 3 older sisters, Carmita, Tamil, and Toshiba, and 2 older brothers, Michael and Victor, and she had a huge extended family with grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles, and she was super close with her family, who called her Kiki or Ki. And she was particularly close with her nieces and nephews. She was that type of aunt that was very enthusiastic about her babies, and she loved them. So Keiona was raised in Richmond, and since she was the baby of the family, her mom said that she was very loved. She actually straight up used the word spoiled. This little girl got everything she wanted, and it's because she was very sweet and very well loved, and everyone who came in contact with her thought she was the greatest little kid, and she was super close with again, her family. Her siblings and her were so close. They had their own bedrooms. All the girls had their own bedrooms. This house had 4 bedrooms, but all of them chose to sleep together in one room. She was happy. She was beautiful. She took pride in her appearance, always making sure to get her hair done and her nails done. But she was also very practical and was like the planner of her family. Like, she liked things done on her terms, and she liked to be in control of her life. Keiona was caring and outgoing and lovely, and she had like a very strong urge to live life to the fullest because she felt like life was a gift from God. She was a very religious woman, and she was said to have a deep love for God in her heart that never died, and she lived her life very much worshiping him. Like, she always had him in her heart. She was pretty and popular in junior high and high school, and she got good grades. Actually, all of her siblings got really good grades. She went to and graduated from Thomasdale High School in 2001, and then she went on to get a good job. She had been working for a company called Prudential Clean Room Service, and she was a soil sort leader, and she had been there for 3 years prior to her murder, and she was very good at her job. She was very dependable, and she was very popular amongst her coworkers, and she was even up for a promotion. She was about to be promoted to a manager's position, and she really, really liked this job. She was actually meant to be there that morning at 6 a.m., but now instead, cops are showing up at her apartment, they're finding it on fire, and she's murdered, and they need to figure out why. So actually, when police initially got this call, they did not know that it was a murder. They just knew that an apartment was on fire and that somebody had died. So they had no idea what they were going into on this scene, because in hearing that an apartment was on fire and somebody had died, they figured that it was likely just because of smoke inhalation. So when they walked into Keiona's apartment and they saw the state that she was in, it was completely shocking. She was in terrible shape. An autopsy determined that Keiona was not the only target of this attack because, okay, not only had Keiona been hit in the head 12 times, but she had been stabbed over 40 times in the abdomen and shot in the abdomen. She was actually shot a few times, and this all led police to believe that her baby, because remember, she was pregnant. She was 3 months pregnant at this time. Police believed, because of all of the damage that had been sustained to her abdomen, that the baby was also a target of this murder, and that whoever killed her was unhappy that she was pregnant. One of the officers working the scene was like, there's no way it's a coincidence that all of these stab wounds were centralized to this area and one of the gunshots. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And they also were like, so. Believed that whoever did this came, killed her, killed the baby intentionally, and then set fire to the house to try to hide what they had done, hoping that people would come and just think that she got burned up in a fire. In the kitchen, they found that all the burners on the stove were turned to high, and the knobs were actually removed from the stove, which doesn't look suspicious at all. And inside the oven, they found that somebody had actually stuffed it with like aerosol cans. So they believed that somebody did all of this to make the apartment actually explode, which would have gotten rid of a lot of the evidence of what had happened here. Whoever was responsible after killing Keiona then went upstairs, because this was like a townhouse style apartment, so they went to the second floor where the bedroom was, and they set fire up there using like old wrapping paper, because remember, this is December 31st. It had just been Christmas. So somebody put all the wrapping paper together, I think, on the bed, and then used an accelerant to make everything burn faster. Luckily, though, police were able to still get some evidence because the fire hadn't been successful in destroying everything, and they recovered from this apartment, quote, knives, firearms, ammunition or casings, fibers, and blood, as well as evidence of, quote, flammable liquids. Specifically, the most important things, I think, is that they found the knife that was used to stab Keiona, and they found a bullet casing from when she had been shot. Now, her family was devastated, dude. They were like, how could this happen? She was literally in the prime of her life. She was so happy. She was just about to get a promotion at work. She had just found out she was pregnant. She was newly pregnant, only 3 months, and she was so excited about it. She was said to be like bursting at the seams and not able to control how excited she was about her future. She was one of those people who had never expected to get pregnant. Like, that wasn't a goal she had for her life. But now that she was, it was like a light switched off in her head, which I can totally relate to, where she was just so excited at the thought of being a mom. And she was super excited specifically because she actually had a partner to do this with. Sometimes you're not lucky enough to have that, but she did, because her and her live-in boyfriend Kenny were set to get married. So Kenny and Keiona had met in December of 2004 when Keiona was just 22 years old, and she felt pretty quickly that he may be the one for her. The two met at her work. He was a driver for the cleaning company where she worked, and she was like, oh, he's super cute, like, I'm super into him. So they started talking, and then they started dating, and she quickly brought him home to her family, and they liked him, and they thought he was a nice guy, and they knew that she really wanted to be with him, and it looked to them like he really wanted to be with her too. They seemed like a really good couple. He was the type of guy that just like showered her with affection. I mean, the two even went on a trip to the Bahamas that I believe he completely paid for. He was just said to be like very good to her. Now, he did have a little bit of baggage when he got into the relationship that could make somebody be like, I'm not sure if this is for me, especially somebody as young as Keiona. Like, what? My brain turned off for a second. Let me rewind for a second. Yes, okay. He had a baby. Like, he already had a child. He had been in a long-term relationship with his high school sweetheart. This was a girl named Kayla, and the two of them had a daughter together. And I know for some people that is a bit of a deal breaker. Like, it probably wouldn't be for me since I am a mom, but I'm also married, so it doesn't apply. But I know some people are kind of like, you can only, once you have a kid, you can only date other people with kids, right? You hear that. That's what Donald Glover says, at least. But for Keiona, this was not the case. She actually loved seeing Kenny as a dad. She would look at him and see how great he was as a father to his daughter, and it made her love him even more. So the two get serious. Kenny and Keiona move in together. They set up a bedroom inside their apartment for when Kenny's daughter's there so that she can stay with him, because they have him and his previous woman, his baby's mother, have a joint custody situation. So sometimes the daughter was with him, sometimes the daughter was with her mom. So whenever she would come over, they had a bedroom set up for her, and they were just like a happy little family, with Keiona playing like the role of a stepmother to this little girl. And reportedly this little girl even called her mom before. And this arrangement for the time being was great for her, because she had never really planned on having kids of her own. So this was her way of kind of stepping into that role without having to, you know, get pregnant and give birth, which some people like. I certainly did not, and I can imagine why she would want to do that, because for the longest time, neither did I. But then around Thanksgiving 2008, she found out that she herself was pregnant as well, and she changed her tune completely, and she was super excited to have a baby, get married, and have that chapter of her life begin. So back to the murder. Kenny initially seemed like he had no idea anything had happened. He was actually away at work at the time that she was murdered, and the apartment was set in the fire. The fire was set in the apartment, and he only found out about it because a neighbor actually called him, because, you know, he was away at work. So he got a little panicky, and he started calling Keiona to find out what was going on, but he got no response. And with every unanswered call, he seemed to get more and more worried. So he actually reached out to her family so that they could go and check on her, since he wasn't there to do so. So her mother did. Her mother rushed over to see what was going on, and she said when she got there, she just saw that there was an ambulance leaving her daughter's apartment, but that the siren wasn't on. And because the siren wasn't on, she just had like a sinking feeling in her chest, because she knew that that wasn't anything good. And it was quickly confirmed that she was right, because an officer came and took her to the side and like sat her down in a police car and informed her that her daughter and her future grandbaby were dead. And she just lost it. Now, even though Kenny said that he was away at work when this murder took place, the police still wanted to talk to him. They'd want to talk to him anyways, because he is the boyfriend. But in addition to being the boyfriend, he is the boyfriend of a woman who's recently found out she's pregnant, and a lot of her attacks seem to be centrally located to her abdomen, which is already weird. But when you add the fact that when police talked to Keiona's sister, they found out that Kenny actually wasn't too stoked to find out that Keiona was pregnant. Like, he wasn't excited initially that the baby was on the way. That made police look at him a little harder. Now, he said that he wasn't super stoked about the fact that she was pregnant at first, because he already had a kid. He had a daughter named Michaela with his high school sweetheart, Kayla and Michaela. And he felt like that kind of chapter of his life was done, so he wasn't like stoked to have to do the whole baby thing all over again. So even though Keiona reportedly told her mother that Kenny had warmed up to the idea and was now excited to be a father again, her sister Tamil was kind of wondering if maybe he wasn't really that excited about it. Maybe he was lying when he said he was okay with it, and maybe he felt like this, getting rid of Keiona, was his way out of the situation. She said that she did think that Keiona and Kenny always seemed like they loved each other, and that her family was super accepting of him and super excited at the fact that the two were going to get married. She had just always kind of gotten a weird vibe from him and felt like he was hiding something. So now police, they want to know what that might be. So police have to wait to meet with Kenny, because he's out, you know, working far away. So he makes the hours drive back, and when police finally get a chance to sit down and talk with him, their first question is like, okay, so where were you when your girlfriend was murdered? And he tells police that when Keiona was attacked, he was out of town. He was actually out of the state doing deliveries near Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, born and raised. Now, I'm sure they were surprised to find that his alibi actually checked out. He had cell phone records that showed he was in that area. He had hotel receipts. He even had his work saying that all of the deliveries that he was meant to make, that he was like scheduled to make in that area, were scheduled on time. So it wasn't really possible for him to be doing his deliveries in Philadelphia and be back in Virginia murdering his girlfriend. Now, even if his alibi hadn't checked out, they did notice some other things while interviewing him that made them feel like he probably wasn't the guy. And one of the things was that while he was being questioned, he was asking questions. He was asking, like, who did this? How did it happen? When did it happen? etc, etc. And this is something that police look out for, because sometimes when somebody's not asking questions, it's because they already know the answers to the questions. They don't have to ask. So he was quickly ruled out, but they didn't take their eyes off him completely, because they were like, even if he didn't do it, he might know something. I mean, he's the closest person to Keiona. They're together every day. He lives with her. And they were right, because when they asked Kenny if he knew anybody who would want to hurt his girlfriend, he said yes, he knew somebody who would want to hurt her. He knew somebody who flat out hated Keiona. And this was his ex-girlfriend, the mother of his daughter, Kayla Cecilia Armstrong. Now, immediately, this made police's ears perk up, because during the time that Kenny was driving back from Philadelphia to meet with police in Virginia, they had, interviewed other witnesses. They're not just going to sit around for all those hours and wait for him. So they had already gone and spoken to Keiona's family. And when they asked her family the same question, they said the same thing. They said that Kayla Armstrong was an absolute menace to Keiona, made her life a living hell, and they were 100% sure that she had something to do with the murder. They actually also believe that Kenny might have something to do with it, and maybe the two, work together. Now, Kayla. Kayla was a Virginia State University student majoring in management, and her classmates, people who knew her from the school, said that she was outgoing, smart, and fun, which is wild because everyone who knew her across the board, well, almost everyone who knew her across the board, said that she was a good person. She was a good mother. She was known to be a religious woman who wanted to go out and become a preacher. Everyone who knew her had nothing but good things to say about her. That was, except for Kenny and Keiona when she was alive, and Keiona's family now that she was deceased, because they said that they got to see the worst parts of Kayla, basically. And Kayla was incredibly jealous of Keiona since day one. As soon as her and Kenny broke up and he moved on with somebody else, it was like she could not deal. He was said to be done with the relationship, but she absolutely was not and would not take no for an answer. And so she started harassing Keiona, and she was able to somehow, I don't know how, I have suspicions as to how, but I don't know how, but she was able to get Keiona's phone number. And she started texting her over and over, harassing her over text, but it didn't stay at just texts. It turns out that 18 months prior to Keiona's murder, she and Kayla had gotten into an altercation that became physical, and they started to fight. And Kayla took a knife and stabbed Keiona in the head. In the head. It required her to get 22 stitches for the stab wound to her head, and Kayla was, of course, arrested, and she was charged with felony assault, but she only served 4 months for this crime. So that's not a very long amount of time for stabbing somebody in the head. So once she got out, Keiona was scared. This fight and how serious it got was kind of a wake-up call for her on how intense and dangerous this was. And once Kayla was out of jail, Keiona was right, because the harassment just continued. For example, just months before Keiona was murdered, her apartment was broken into and it was vandalized. Now, they never were able to say definitively who did this, who broke into her apartment, who vandalized it. They had an idea who, but they couldn't say for sure. But whoever did do it wrote all over Keiona's walls. And what they wrote were things about still being intimate with Kenny, about how this person was still banging Kenny. And they wrote about a mark, a birthmark, or was it a tattoo? It was a tattoo. And it was a tattoo that Keiona had that was on an intimate part of her body that one would not know about unless one had seen it while being intimate with her. So somehow this person knew about that. So they didn't know this was Kayla, but it definitely sounds like it probably was. Things got so bad that finally Keiona just couldn't take it anymore, and she decided she was going to get a restraining order. The harassment was relentless. She was threatening her all the time. She said in this application for the restraining order that she was getting calls and texts where Kayla was just threatening her, saying she was going to attack her, saying she was going to add more stitches to her head, referring to when she had literally stabbed her. And she said in these restraining orders that she was scared for her life and scared this girl was going to kill her. And Keiona's sister said of this, quote, "My sister would go to court for a restraining order and she would tell the judge, 'This girl is trying to kill me. Kayla is trying to kill me. She is going to kill me.'" Now, Keiona did get this restraining order. It was issued to her. And part of the restraining order, one of the conditions, was that when Kayla would come to drop her daughter off at the apartment that Kenny and Keiona shared, she had to stay in the car because, they shared a daughter, so they had to do a drop off and before Kayla would come in the house. And the restraining order said obviously she couldn't do that. But 3 days before Keiona was murdered, when Kayla came to either drop off or pick up her daughter, I can't remember which, she just burst in the apartment without notice, without being allowed to. And so Keiona gets up and is like, "What the fuck are you doing here?" Obviously, and a fight broke out. It got so bad that Kenny had to step in and separate the two. And this situation makes me so frustrated when I think about this, when I picture this in my head, because you're doing this, right? And you're doing this in front of your kid. It's just so petty. How is this good for your child? How is it good for your child to see you being violent to another person, and all because you can't let go of a relationship that's run its course? I get being heartbroken. I get being so sad that life didn't go the way you wanted it to go, and that all the plans you had made with this person, because they were together a while, all the plans that you made for your future were revolved around this person and involved this person. So now in losing them, it feels like not only have you lost them, but you've lost your future. I get that. But she took it to the obsessive. For example, in one police report, Keiona wrote that Kayla had said to her, quote, "Kenny and I have a daughter together, and for that reason, if no other, we will always be together, and he will always be my man. No woman will ever take him away from me. I won't let it happen." So clearly now that Keiona's been murdered, police want to talk to Kayla, so they have to try to find her. They have to hunt her down, and this isn't easy. It takes a little while, but when they finally find her, they actually find her at a storage center where I guess she had been living. And when they find her, she's hiding under a desk, which is a choice, but they get her and they're like, "Okay, we're gonna take you into custody now." So they bring her in and they question her. And of course she denies everything. She denies all involvement. And she even tries to downplay the fights between her and Keiona as simply new girlfriend and baby mama drama. But then during the interview, police mentioned that Keiona was pregnant at the time she was killed. And Kayla had an outburst that she didn't seem to be able to control, but she was basically "I knew it." Actually, she said specifically, quote, "I was right." Another thing that police noticed during this interview that was kind of weird that stuck out to them is okay, you know how sometimes your body will betray you, or we'll see in these cases where you're trying to say something, or in this instance, you're trying to lie about something, and all the words are coming out the way you want them to, but your body betrays you in that it does things involuntarily. You have these little tics that come out even though you're not meaning to, and police kind of catch on to that. Well, in this instance, Kayla, as soon as she started talking about the murder, she started belching over and over. They couldn't tell she was doing it on purpose or if she wasn't doing it on purpose, but it got to the point that one of the officers was like, "What the fuck are you doing right now?" And she had no answer. Now, even though they didn't have enough on Kayla to arrest her for Keiona's murder, they seemed like they still wanted to hold on to her while they looked into her for this further. They didn't say that. They didn't say that they were arresting her for this. What they said was that they were going to be arresting her for the assault that she had committed on Keiona 3 days earlier when she broke the restraining order and went into Keiona's home. So they arrested her for that, but really I think they were just holding her so that they could investigate her further, because this is something police do all the time. And in the meantime, they also got her cell phone records. Now, she did have an attorney, and her attorney protested this big time. They were like, "You are arresting her for something and saying for one thing and saying it's something else for one. And if you're going to actually arrest her on this, because I guess this is something she did, you should at least give her bond so she can get out, because she's not being arrested for murder right now. She's being arrested on a suspected assault." But it doesn't look like she ever made bond, or at least if she did, she wasn't able to raise the money because she did remain in jail. Kayla sat in jail for 6 months for the assault before a judge actually threw the case out because he didn't feel like there was enough evidence to show who had instigated the fight, so she was released from jail. Which is so wild to me because she had literally gone into Keiona's house, so I don't know what this judge was thinking, especially since Keiona had a restraining order, but I couldn't find clarification on how they came to this decision. When she left jail, she was happy, she was smiling, she was surrounded by friends and family, and when she was asked by reporters like how she kept her chin up during the time that she had to actually spend in jail, because she was in there for months, she said it was all because of the support of her mother, her daughter, and her friends. Now, apparently Kayla being released was problematic for the detectives working Keiona's case. They said that it really put a huge wrench in what they were doing, and it set the case back because once she was released, a lot of the witnesses they were trying to work with were harder to deal with once she was out of jail. And unfortunately, they really hadn't made much progress in the case. During the 6 months that Kayla was in jail, they had been investigating, but they didn't find anything solid. They didn't find any smoking gun that actually linked Kayla to Keiona's murder. In fully looking over the crime scene, they weren't able to find anything, no evidence that concretely linked Kayla, or anyone else for that matter, to the murder. They did say that they had found some DNA, that they found DNA in like 2 places in the apartment, but they didn't clarify what this was, whose it was, and clearly it wasn't bulletproof enough to make a difference in this case because it didn't. They did, however, find some circumstantial evidence, and this evidence at least made them feel like they were going in the right direction by suspecting Kayla for Keiona's murder. They discovered that the night before the murder, because technically, she was murdered after midnight, Kayla had placed several phone calls to Keiona's next door neighbors, which is weird, but basically she was calling to see if Kenny was home that night. She was calling over and over, and they believe she was doing this to see if Keiona was alone. So investigators really felt like this was helping add to their pile of circumstantial evidence. Still, the prosecutor did not believe that they had enough evidence to bring Kayla to court for the murder of Keiona, so years went by with her family just sitting there waiting for justice. And I don't know how anyone deals with that, just sitting there and having no answers, like knowing in your heart what happened but not being able to legally do anything about it. I don't know how anyone does that. And Keiona's mother said that she just gave it up to God, that she trusted in God to have the right result come out, and that He brought her through all the trauma she was dealing with. Now, speaking of her mother, just speaking of her family in general, they were so heartbroken, dude. Their whole community was. This case had such an emotional impact on everyone who knew Keiona or knew of Keiona that the local preacher asked for peace and for everyone not to allow this tragedy, the tragedy of her murder, to cripple them. He asked his community to just let police do their jobs, but he did acknowledge that whoever did this to Keiona, that what happened to her was misguided, wicked, and evil. January 8th, 9 days after Keiona's murder, her funeral was held, and this was the hardest day of her family's lives. I mean, they had lost a sister, a daughter, a friend, a mother, you know what I mean? And she laid there in an open casket, and she was wearing like a dark suit, and what really destroyed me is I read a note that they laid a yellow like baby blanket or baby towel over her chest for her child. And then at the front of the service, there was a huge 10-foot photo of Keiona just smiling. And it was just such a sad service, man, because everyone knew her and everybody loved her because she was such a religious woman too. The pastor who was presiding over her funeral, this was Pastor Harold, had known her her whole life. And throughout the service, he just referred to her as their Kiki. And as for her funeral, it was incredibly sad. Like, tensions were very high. Nobody wanted Kenny to be there, but he did go, which caused some tension. He did sit in the back throughout the service and he kept his head down, but this didn't really last because once the service was done and it moved to the graveside burial, which, if you've been to a funeral, it's just separate. It's what you do after. So everybody went and a huge altercation broke out there with Kenny getting in a fight with like a shit ton of people. And it started small, but it blew up into a bunch of people fighting, which didn't surprise me because like 60 cars went to the cemetery for the burial. So like 24 people are fighting each other at the funeral, which I can only imagine how heartbreaking that would be for her family to see. But also, I'm sure some of them participated because there's just so much built up anger. And I guess the cops did come, but when they came, the people just scattered and the police didn't try to catch them to like arrest them for the fighting because they understood what everybody was going through. After her funeral, her family just got together and they shared a meal together while they just tried to come to grips with what they had lost. Keiona's family, dude, they just sounded like good ass people. Like, it was very clear in reading about them that Keiona was raised in, like, she was raised right and in a loving home. Her family was known as taking in many children who were in bad situations, and they helped raise them. The pastor at her funeral said, like, her family was known to be a family who, if you needed help, if you had a child you couldn't provide for, this family was there for you. And now they had lost their own baby, and there was no real answers for that. But that's not to say that nobody was trying, because they were. Like, the lead investigator on Keiona's case was very invested in solving it. He had poured everything he had into her investigation since day one. He said that it was incredibly tough to not be able to solve it, and it was that case that kept him up at night thinking about it, just wondering if there's anything else that he could have done so that it could actually be solved. It would take 3 years for any significant movement to be made on this case, but once it did, things got very interesting. So 3 years after Keiona's murder, a new Commonwealth attorney took on the case, and they decided that they would take it to trial. Now, I didn't know what a Commonwealth attorney was, so I took it to the Google machine, and basically it's just a DA. So there was a new DA on the case, and they decided they would take Kayla to trial. An indictment was issued, and they went to arrest her, but it appeared that she had gotten wind of this because she ran. She straight up dipped, leaving her home, completely cleaning out her apartment, and just ditching her young child. And police believed that she was able to run because her family was helping her, or at least that they knew she was running and knew where she was. So they went to her mother and they were like, hey, you need to tell her to just turn herself in, because she can't run forever, and it's going to get worse for her if we have to find her. Keiona's family had been so relieved to know the case was going to get taken to trial. So when they learned that she had ran, that she was unable to be found and maybe left the state, they were really upset, but they were also confident that she would be brought to justice. They were just kind of like discouraged, right, that it was going to be so hard to find her, but they decided that they wanted to hold out hope. They decided that instead of panicking because she was on the run and waiting on bated breath for her to be caught, they decided that that weekend, the weekend that it was announced that she was going to be arrested and that she was on the run, they were going to have a celebration of Keiona's life instead. Then they finally caught her. It's January 20th, 2012. I want you to picture this with me. It's January 20th, 2012, and the U.S. Marshals track Kayla, that's her name, Kayla, to a friend's house. They knock on the door. The man who lives there opens the door, and he gives them permission to search the house. He's like, go for it. I have nothing to do with this. So they go. They search the house high and low when they come to a closet. The officer opens the closet, and there's all this stuff hanging there. We've seen a closet. So he just reaches through the clothes. And what does he find? But a human arm. I honestly can't make this up. She's literally just like hiding in a closet, and she thinks that's gonna work. People are interesting. That's the most I can say about that. So she's arrested that night at 11:30 p.m. and she's charged with first-degree murder. And then somehow it gets even crazier, dude. So she's in jail. She's awaiting trial. She's been in jail waiting for trial for about a year when she gets accused of trying to hire a hitman. Apparently what had happened is that Kayla had learned the man she did all of this over, the man she loved, the father of her child, Kenny, was intending to testify against her at trial. And when she found this out, this simply would not do. So she tried to hire somebody for $2,000 to murder Kenny so he couldn't testify at her trial. And the person she tried to hire was a jailhouse informant. Bro, okay. So she tries to get a hitman by trying to hire this jailhouse snitch who was like, that's not what I do, but let me refer you to somebody. And she refers him to this hitman who is actually an undercover cop pretending to be a hitman. Like, ma'am, we've seen this play out so many times. So she talks to this guy and she tells this guy she wants him murdered, and she wants him murdered in such a way that his family does not get an open casket because she's an evil bitch. And then once the jailhouse snitch gets out of jail, she tries to call him 250 times. She calls him over and over and over. She was very serious about this plan. And she thought that she was being super smart while doing this because she was trying to hide the fact that she was making these calls by using another prisoner's PIN, which we've heard about this before. It's what they use to call out so that calls can be monitored. So she tries to use another, I keep wanting to say employee, but it's prisoner, another prisoner's PIN. But all these calls are recorded. So police sit there and they listen to the recordings and they hear her trying to hire somebody to kill Kenny. And it wasn't like a casual thing where she's like, I want him dead. No, she went through extensive lengths to actually have him killed. Police were stunned. They were like, she's already in jail for a murder. and then sits here and tries to plot another murder? Like, who the fuck is this chick? And she, of course, denies it, even though she's caught literally red-handed. She's like, wasn't me, pulled a Shaggy, wasn't me, and refuses to take any responsibility at all. Now, as I said in the beginning, Kayla didn't even end up going through a trial because she was offered and did accept a plea deal. And it's frustrating because it does seem so obvious that it's her, right? But it is entirely circumstantial. There's no physical evidence. There's no DNA. They don't have a murder weapon. They can't even prove that Kayla was in Keiona's house. So, since she was being charged with more than one thing, Kayla entered 2 pleas. So first, for the attempted capital murder and solicitation to commit capital murder, she did plead guilty. And this was for her trying to, hire somebody to kill Kenny. She did plead guilty to that. But when it came to Keiona, she didn't plead guilty to this. She instead took an Alfred plea, where basically she was acknowledging that the police had enough evidence to possibly get a conviction against her if they went to court, but she wasn't actually admitting any guilt in doing it. She's like, listen, you have enough to get me, but still I didn't do it. That's essentially what her Alfred plea was for. She refused to admit any responsibility when it came to Keiona's murder. She did the opposite. She said that she was a loving person, a loving mother, a woman of God, and that she would never do anything like this, but she felt like she had to. Why she felt like she had to, she didn't really explain, but she felt like this deal was the best thing she could do, which is why she accepted it. And she said that she believed in accepting this deal, she would only get 14 years, though I'm not sure why she thought that. Like, she accepted this plea, which we've seen before, and after she accepted it, she tried to pretend like she didn't understand what she had agreed to. And that's not how it works, because the judge had went through extensive measures to make sure she understood. They go through a lengthy series of questions to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to. And she did, but then afterwards she's like, but I didn't get it. And I guess she even tried to withdraw her plea agreement or just try to get a new trial altogether, but the judge denied that, saying she had no grounds to do so. So, she was going to be sentenced, and the prosecutor asked the judge that the court just show Kayla the same mercy and compassion that she had shown Keiona. Kayla did what she could to try to save herself. She gave a statement to the court in which she said, quote, I am imperfect and am a human being saved by grace. I am not an animal. The judge disagreed, though, and said to her, quote, in my opinion, you have no regard for human life. She was then given her punishment. So, for the voluntary manslaughter, she was given 10 years. The range for this was 1 to 10 years, so she was given the max. For attempted capital murder, she was given 60 years with 40 years suspended. The range was 20 years to life. And for attempted solicitation to commit capital murder, she was given 40 years, but it was also suspended, and the range for this was 5 to 40 years. So she was given the max, but it was suspended. So in total, she was given 110 years, but 80 of those years were suspended. And for the life of me, I do not understand the point of suspended sentences. Like, why even give a sentence if you're just going to suspend it? If you're a legal guy or gal or person, let me know down below what the fuck, because I don't get it. But basically what this means is she was sentenced to 30 years, and she has to serve 85% of those 30 years before she is eligible for parole. This would put her in her 50s when she is first set to be released, and apparently, if I understand correctly, it also means that if she breaks the law again while she's out of jail, she has to complete the rest of her sentence. But I'm not entirely clear on that, but that's the way it read. Whatever. As soon as Kayla was sentenced, one of Keiona's family members jumped to their feet and yelled at her that they hoped that she died in prison. Now, as for Keiona's mother, she's not happy with the sentence that Kayla was given. She doesn't think it's enough time, but she feels like she needs to move towards some closure. Her daughter is gone. There's nothing she can do about that, but she still has to live for her other kids and for her grandchildren. So she needs to just try to let it go, which seems like an impossible task, but we do see people do it. I just will never understand how they have the strength to do so. When asked what she would like to say to Kayla if she was able to do so, Keiona's mother said, quote, I would say to her to give her life to the Lord and ask God to forgive her. God is the only one that can save you at this time. Now, as for Kayla's daughter, because remember, she had a young daughter named Michaela at the time that she was arrested, everything I see says that she's living with Kenny now and that she's living a wonderful life. And as it comes to Kenny, it doesn't seem like he was involved at all, but I kind of couldn't get a strong handle based on the articles I read what Keiona's family thinks about him. Some family members seem to say that he loved Keiona and that he had expressed his apologies for what happened to her and he was heartbroken over what happened. But some things I saw online said that it seemed like perhaps he had been playing both women a little bit and hooking up with both women while he was with Keiona. I don't know if that's true. I have a little bit of an opinion. I'm sure you can guess what it is, but I don't know. I don't know him. All I know for sure is that he was determined not to have been involved in Keiona's murder, and I would say the fact that Kayla tried to have him murdered shows that that's probably true. Now, as for Kayla herself, she is still in jail, and she actually has a profile page on a website called CagedLadies.com, which I did not realize was a thing. It's just like Write a Prisoner, which you guys know I fucking love Write a Prisoner. I don't. I think it's stupid, and I don't think you should have that right, but this website seems to be the same kind of thing, but for women specifically. And her profile page says, quote, "Hey, my name is Kayla. I have a great personality with a lot of assets, if you know what I mean. I want a friend that wants something different in a woman and wants to have a great conversation. I like to exercise, watch old movies, listen to music, and spend time with those I care about. I have 2 degrees in business management and paralegal studies. In my spare time, I write business plans for different projects I want to work on when I get home." So that's something, I guess. At least she gets to go home. Keiona doesn't get to go home. I don't get people, man. She murdered this woman. She stole her future. She stole her baby's future. She ruined her own life. She ruined her daughter's life. She ruined the lives of everyone who loved Keiona. And for what? Nothing. And now because of her, all Keiona's mother has left is a large photo of her on her wall. And every day she looks at this photo and she tells her murdered daughter that she loves her. And with that, my friends, is the story of the tragic murder of Keiona Braxton. I hope you found my telling of this to be informative, and I hope it made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Keiona with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I now want to revisit the question of the day, now that you have some information to go on. And the question of the day was this: do you believe that the sentencing in this case was justice? Do you think that the plea was appropriate, or should the attorneys have tried to take her to trial and see if they were able to get a conviction? Like, do you think there was enough evidence to put Kayla in jail for Keiona's murder? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because I'm very curious what you might think. Before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with a case suggestion, any case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of, or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below for your convenience, along with a link to my membership, where you get early access to non-sponsored videos, priority comment responses, things like that. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.